Greetings, everyone. I am Ferlanda Fox Nixon, the Chief of Policy and External Affairs of the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey, and I will be serving as the moderator of today's panel discussion on respectful dialogue in a time of controversy. Our distinguished panelists are Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill, who represents New Jersey's 11th District in the United States House of Representatives, Mr. William Ludlam, who is president of the Morristown, New Jersey stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Reverend Dr. Lynn Patterson, who is associate pastor of faith formation and discipleship at First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens and author of the novel Deceit. And then we also have Cliff Dawkins, who serves as the Assistant Dean and Director of Minority Student Program at Rutgers Law School on the Newark campus, and is the Managing Partner of Dawkins and Warrington Law Group. So welcome, everyone, and we're going to dive straight into today's conversation. Personally, I'm at the point where I almost cringe before I turn on the television. I brace myself for what news might greet me. If it's not a mass shooting, then it's a deadly riot. If it's not a deadly riot, then surprise, surprise, it's an insurrection at the US Capitol. And so really, we want to talk today about why does there seem to be an increase in violence? And why does violence seem to be the choice of first resort when people have disagreements? So I wanted to start off with you, Congresswoman Sherrill, and find out from you, what are your thoughts on why there has been this apparent rise in violence in recent years?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for convening this panel on such an important topic today, really getting to the heart, I think, of some of what's going on in our country right now, and what can we, and I think we're going to get to this in the final discussion, what can we do to support and help the beloved community, as Dr. Martin Luther King called it, and I think of it as really our community of the United States of America, the citizenry, the people that we love and share this country with. And I've thought about this a lot, so I think I'm limited to 3 minutes, and in the interest of time, I will try to keep this tight. But I think, as a history major, what always struck me was the world always seemed to sort of explode at the same time. So not only were you having horrible things happening in Germany and then land wars in Europe, but you were also having wars in Japan, with Japan, and in the Pacific, and China entering the globe at war. And how can that be? How can it be that people across the world suddenly at the same time engage in this unrest and this violence? And I think when you look at it often, it's the global economy changing, it's people's place in the world changing dramatically, and we're experiencing that right now. So let's take a little bit of a look really quickly at what's going on in the world. We've seen, lack of investment in Black communities, where I think the promise of the civil rights movement moved communities forward, but has not been realized. And now communities demanding justice. When we talk about systemic racism, we're not talking about simple bias. We're talking about the government consciously not investing in Black communities, such as Black soldiers not getting the GI Bill, redlining, Black families not being able to live in certain communities where there was work and good schools. And Cory Booker can speak eloquently on just that and how it impacted his family when he moved into a neighborhood with great schools. So that has happened. We haven't fulfilled the promise yet of the civil rights movement. We also have communities in the middle of the country where post-manufacturing communities, my grandfather got out of World War II, was in Ohio, got a great job on the factory floor, was able to pay for, raising his children, having a home, having a car. When he and my grandmother were sick at the end of their life, they had a great pension, great benefits. That is no longer available to many people in the middle of the country. There is a scarcity of jobs as we face globalization. And we're just also seeing the federal government implementing programs that don't invest in the middle class, don't return the wealth of the nation to the middle class of this nation, but rather seem to be funneling it to the very top. So we see these huge wealth disparities, and people across the country sense that there's a lack of fairness and that there's an unfairness in the system. They're not able to get ahead like their parents were, like their grandparents were. And that has angered some communities. And unfortunately, we've seen, say what you will about President Trump, he was a charismatic leader and able to explain or enrage people and explain to them what he thought was going on, scapegoat certain communities, drive this rage and this unfairness in the system. And I think then we've seen the ultimate, example of how horrible that can be on January 6th. When we saw, I was on the floor of the House of Representatives as people tried to end our democratic form of government. And so I think, as I'm going to turn it over to others, I think that is the problem that we're seeing. And we see it not just on January 6th, I see it on the road. I just, everyday life, Americans are unhappy and enraged in certain cases. I stopped at a four-way stop and I motioned to let the car go. They honked at me, rolled down their window and started screaming at me that they were going to let me go. And I was like, in a past life, this would have been seen as a kindness, which is how I meant it. So I certainly didn't mean it any other way. So we're seeing this affect just day-to-day lives of Americans.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. And I wanted to go to President Ludlam. Is there anything that you'd like to add? What are you seeing? What do you think is at the root cause of the violence and the unrest that we're seeing?
Thank you. Well, great introductory comments by Congresswoman Sherrill. And I'd like to also express my appreciation, gratitude to you, Ferlanda, and to the Martin Luther King Observance Committee for inviting Congresswoman Sherrill, Reverend Patterson, and Dean Dawkins, and myself to this panel to address what I think we're all agreeing are very significant, deeply troubling, and growing divisions in our society, and to discuss potential ways we can improve them. In my view, the underlying problem is that we are not following the admonition of Dr. Martin Luther King when he said, "When civic charity is at work, our goal of reasoning and discussion should be, as said, not to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding." And I think as we approach problems with this philosophy, we're bridge building, we're making friends, and we're solving problems, not creating further divisions. I think we all have firmly held beliefs and biases. That's part of human nature. That's who we are. But when we allow these biases to foster contempt for those that we don't agree with, our ability to bridge to others' perspectives diminishes, and it really blocks our ability to embrace these differences and diversity, which creates such richness and happiness in our culture. One way that many on all sides of all issues, I think, that have gone, quote, too far, is by allowing their passion and commitment to issues and positions of importance to lead them to refuse to engage with and show basic respect to others that believe differently. Congresswoman Sherrill referenced some of the events of January 6th. One of my coworkers, after those events, was very outspoken on their perspective of what happened, and then went on to make the statement that they unfriended everybody who disagreed with them on their Facebook. And I gulped. As I thought about it, I said, isn't this exactly the opposite reaction that we really want? Isn't this a time where we want to embrace, we want to outreach, we want to create bridges, we want to understand. And by pulling further back into our own perspectives, I think it really fosters this division and inability to see another person's perspective. I just want to read. There's a great quote by the former Attorney General Robert Abrams that I think just beautifully summarizes this, and then I'll end there. He said, "Among these threats is a troubling increase in divisiveness, incivility, and polarization in our society. Examples abound of those who are unwilling to associate or even listen to those who have differences of opinion on political, social, religious, and other issues. Increasingly, many people view those with whom they disagree as, quote, enemies, and they will attempt to discredit, vilify, silence them rather than to listen and understand. Too many display a willingness to trample over the rights of others in order to achieve their objectives. This increasing incivility and division is not inconsequential. It threatens to harm our society." So I think that just beautifully captures what would be my response to your question is, what is the underlying problem? And I firmly believe that if we don't tackle these issues, as we're trying to do today in this panel discussion, we are significantly leaving at risk the very fabric of our society. And I'm, again, really appreciative of the Martin Luther King Observance Committee for putting this panel together and to really making their effort to try to create bridges and solve these problems.
Thank you so much. And when I look at my monitor, I like what I see. I see a diverse complement of thought leaders who obviously are willing to share their perspectives, but also to learn from other viewpoints. And so I thank each and every one of you for participating, because it makes the panel discussion more robust, more fulsome, more of value to the listeners. And with that said, I'd like to go to Reverend Patterson and find out what your perspective is on why you think that there is such a heightened level of violence and unrest in the country right now.
I would like to echo the appreciation stated by those who spoke before me. And I also want to say, I just really believe that the Lord ordered the panel, because we're saying, I was going to talk about scarcity and I decided not to because you gave me 3 minutes. And thank God Congressman Sherrill covered it. I was going to quote Abrams and I decided not to. And President Ludlow did it. So now I'm going to tell you what I did decide to say. The preponderance of commentary silos, where we see news, information, opinions, and discussion communities, are dominated by single points of view and perspectives, is what creates and reinforces this mob mentality. Because of what President Ludlow just, if you're going to unfriend people who don't think like you, you're never going to hear anybody else's opinion. And I'm calling a whole lot of our internet sites and media outlets commentary silos, because I don't see them as news. They do not objectively report facts about occurrences. One example, if you read HuffPost, you're going to be reinforced by your liberal leftist way of thinking. If you read the National Review online, you're going to be reinforced by your far right way of thinking. Fox News has never, ever used the word insurrection to talk about what happened on January 6th. And a whole lot of human beings who, for whatever reason, have a strong desire that they experience as a need to be part of a large group are susceptible to these commentary silos. When disaffected groups are fueled by misinformation, they start to see the world in a certain way, and they believe that credible news outlets are telling them that that's the way the world is. And then to bond and to fit in with these revved up, misinformed people, they adopt the behaviors and the actions of those around them. And that's what mob mentality is. It destroys people's inhibitions and it makes them do things that otherwise they would not do. It's also known as hive mentality. And I think that term helps to explain the swarms that popped up frequently during the term of our orange president, because he did get the people excited and disaffected and all kinds of negative emotions. Violence, disrespect, and incivility, in my opinion, are the result of people being programmed to hate those who are not like them. And I think there's a major loss of self-awareness in a herd, a hive, or a mob. Emotional states, excitement, anger, hostility are heightened, and then these behaviors are viewed as acceptable. And somebody listening might argue that not all attacks occur in a crowd, and that is true. But I would argue that the individual actors have been radicalized by a commentary silo.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. And we're going to go to you, Dean Dawkins. What would you like to add? A lot has been said.
A
And
lot, yes.
so it's tough being the last one to chime in, but what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, first, I also want to echo thanks to you, Ms. Nixon, and to the panel and to the Observance Committee for the opportunity. I agree with everything stated by this fantastic panel so far. I think I want to take a little bit of a different angle on this. I think it's kind of important on this question that we start at the end in a way, and that is with where King was in his life's work when his time was tragically cut short. In King's fifth book, which was entitled "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" King begins to kind of talk about this very thing. What is going to carry forward, right? Are we going to come together and understand our interconnectedness and mutuality? Or are we going to devolve into chaos, right, as a people? And of course, he was trying to push us toward the beloved community. In the book, he states, Americans must recognize that justice for Black people cannot be achieved without radical changes in the structure of our society. The comfortable, entrenched, and privileged cannot continue to tremble at the prospect of change of the status quo. This is a multiracial nation where all groups are dependent on each other. There is no separate white path to power and fulfillment, short of social disaster, that does not share power with Black aspirations for freedom and human dignity. From my perspective, we live in a time where it appears the same concerns from King's time have carried forward decades later. A world characterized by a sense that rugged individualism supersedes our collective success, where fake news and alternative facts have real consequences and help to widen the divide in lived experiences, even in the very same context, where the sentiment of, as long as it's not happening to me, I'm comfortable with turning a blind eye, is all too commonplace. In King's time, the nation experienced a jarring prick of the social moral conscience when atrocities that had been kind of cabined, right, contained in our various communities were nationally televised. Today, those scenes of violence are pretty common, and arguably there's a numbing effect that's happened across the country. To Reverend Patterson's point, there is some programming happening here, and our kids are watching and they're learning, and behaviors are being normalized that we hoped to keep in the rear view. But put simply, I think we need to heed our Pledge of Allegiance. That is, I believe we need to restore a sense of us all being one nation under God, indivisible, with our ever so elusive goal of granting liberty and justice for all American citizens, irrespective of race, class, gender, sexual identity, etc. And so I do echo the sentiments of everyone on this panel. I think one of my biggest concerns is just making sure that we are evidencing, demonstrating the behaviors that we want the next generation to understand characterizes the beloved community and our national social climate.
Well, thank you so much to each of you. So we know that we can't forget our history, right? We've always heard that. We have to, if we don't remember it, we're bound to repeat it, right? We know that there are economic pressures. We know that there is the fear of the other and an unwillingness to get to learn more about the other. We intentionally silo ourselves, as Reverend Patterson said, so that we can't have that opportunity to learn from one another. And so thank you so much for kind of really grounding this and giving us the proper context to now try to talk about some solutions. And so, Dean Dawkins, I'm giving you a break because I'm starting off with you this time. So so what are some legal solutions to fostering civil discourse?
Thank you so much for the question. I love this piece of things, right? Because I like looking forward and being solution oriented. And I think this question gives us an opportunity to do just that. Um, I want to start by saying, yes, we should be pushing to expand the protections of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We should be fighting to restore the protections and provisions that were carved out of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, right? That these are things that we have to continue to push for. We can never get too tired. We can never take our foot off the pedal, so to speak, with regard to policy and to progress that we've made along policy lines. Among other important work across the country, but I do have a kind of simpler short-term solution that I think is a bit more pragmatic. And of course, we want to keep a close eye. Just one more important item. We saw what happened with this rather conservative Supreme Court and the overturning of Roe versus Wade. We have to keep a close watch on what this court will do in the next session with regard to affirmative action. And of course, we've seen the tremendous progress that that policy has had over the years. So we want to keep a close watch on what happens there in the coming session. But I also think we need to find ways to have more meaningful dialogue in our kind of personal circles. And what I mean by this is we need more folks that are comfortable with going into those kind of exclusive areas, right? The living rooms, the dining rooms, the morning services, et cetera, and have those hard conversations with friends and family and loved ones in spaces where folks of color simply cannot be, right? And I call this winning your circle. And what I mean by this is it's the practice of connecting and agreeing on important issues and topics with family and loved ones first, then with our home communities, with our friends and our neighbors, and then expanding to our towns and expanding to our state, and ultimately molding some consensus nationally, right? And that's one thing that King encouraged us to do, right? To be brave enough to be molders of consensus, right? Which is really important for leadership. So from my perspective, that's where we start. We start by winning our circles and remembering King's advisement that it's always the right time to do right by others.
Thank you. And Congresswoman Sherrill, I would imagine that your response would be similar to Dean Dawkins, given your background in law and your current status as a legislator. But what are some solutions that you would like to suggest?
Certainly. And again, yes, I am similar in that I love this part of the question. I don't like to, as we say, just admire the problem. We want solutions. We want to move forward. And so, first of all, I'm just going to have to apologize in advance if I have to go for votes, but I will stay as long as I can. I think that what I've heard with the hive mentality and the silos and the unfriending people is what is making it so hard, I think, for us to come together sometimes. And that's the othering of everybody else, people who don't think like you, people who don't look like you, people who don't pray like you, are somehow becoming this force that is against you. And you have to kind of hunker down, become a little bit of in a silo with your family or your friends or your neighborhood. We even hear now in this country, more and more people are moving themselves. Maybe their family's been in New Jersey for decades and they're moving to Florida because they want to move with people, to see people who think just like them and live with people who think just like them. And I think sometimes when we're trying to understand this and when we're trying to think about this, what comes to my mind as a veteran and somebody who has spoken to so many people who've said, the first time I ever served with someone of this background was when I was drafted into the military. The first time I ever met a Jewish person or a Black person or became friends with someone different from the people in my neighborhood was when I served in the military because of the draft. And I really do think, given what we're facing in this country, We need a national service option for people, and it does not have to be the military. I take pride in my service. It's not for everyone. It can be in Teach for America. It can be in a National Health Corps. It can be in AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps, but we do need a way to bring people from across our country together to realize that, and I know this is cliche, and I want people to hear this because it's said so often, but I have found it to be so true. There is more that unites us than divides us. And I am telling you, it is hard. I after January 6th, there were very many people I wanted in Congress to stop talking to. And I was encouraged not to do that. And I'm so glad, because I've had some hard conversations with people, and maybe we don't agree, but I do really value sometimes the relationship we have and the way we move forward as a Congress. And I think that takes place in your family. I think that takes place in your neighborhoods. And that is so important. And it is hard work in the living room. Sometimes it's, I say sometimes to my mayors, they have a harder job than I do, because the more personal the relationship, the more tightly knit the community, the harder it is to say things that might not be welcome sometimes for people to hear. So I think national service is one. And then I just think the other thing we have to do is really have compassion in our schools. It is where people want to take the fight, but I would argue that it is where we want to unite instead, where we want to come around a value of caring for our kids and putting the children first and thinking hard. If you are concerned about some of the teaching that's going on in school, that is fair as a parent. But I also want, as you're thinking about this, to think of other parents. Think of the parent whose child is identifying as part of the LGBTQ community and is so scared that their child is not going to be accepted at school, and knows the statistics of children and children who die by suicide or have other mental health problems because of the way they are treated or bullied. And think of that parent's desire to just protect their child and have some empathy and compassion as we go into some of these hard conversations. I think really taking it to trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, which again, we can do through a national service as we get to know people, and they're not other, they're just our comrades and people who care about the country as much as we do. I think putting yourself in someone else's shoes is often where this starts to build compassion and empathy.
That's an awesome answer. Thank you so much for that. I hope we have you for the duration, but if you do have to leave, we certainly understand. I would like to go to Reverend Patterson, and I would like for you to share your solutions, whether they're faith-based, whether they're just plain old common sense. What would you like to offer as some recommendations on how we can improve the current climate?
I'm going to share in less than 3 minutes, because I hope that Congresswoman Sherrill can be with us for this last question. With regard to the media consumption that I mentioned earlier, I think responsible leaders have to expose ourselves to other points of view. As much as it pains me, I do look at other media outlets so I can know what the other side is saying. And I think it's important for us to expose the people in our circles to facts as opposed to opinions and infotainment. But faith-based solutions, I think, to the discord and the disunity require clerics to come out of our silos as well. I'm so happy to be here with my brother from the Church of Latter-day Saints, because we often wait until the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday to engage in interfaith dialogue. I am very passionate about ecumenism and non-denominationalism, because God is much bigger than denominations and even religions. And before any of my good Baptist folks start clutching their pearls, we have to realize that there are not going to be any denominational sections in heaven. And we also have to realize that the individuals in Jesus' genealogy were justified by God before Jesus was ever made flesh and came to dwell among us. So while Jesus is certainly the way for me, it is wrong for me to pretend that anyone who doesn't see Jesus as the way is not a valid human being. I'm in the process of being certified by Kaleidoscope Institute as a facilitator so that I can do what Dean Dawkins just described, to help to establish diverse and sustainable communities. Kaleidoscope Institute, for those who don't know, was founded by Eric Law back in 2006 to address racialized divisions and diversity issues in faithful and constructive ways. Law is an Episcopal priest, and he started his work in the 80s, but it kind of went way below the radar until 1991, when Rodney King was brutally beaten by police and riots struck out in LA. And then people turned to Eric, like, haven't you been working on something that deals with this? And he had a chance to make it a bigger deal. One other thing, because there's a whole lot of things, but I want to be brief, is how we use the Bible and how we interpret scripture. Irresponsible use of the Bible has led to slavery and racism and sexism and classism and xenophobia and homophobia. So Richard Rohr, a Catholic priest who is the author of my 2023 devotional book, Yes and, says that Catholics have to be converted to giving the Bible just a little bit of authority, and Protestants have to repent for selective reading of some text and avoiding other texts. And I would add to that our right-wing so-called evangelicals need to get to know the Prince of Peace. God created one human race, and capitalism, as was mentioned in Congresswoman Sherrill's first answer, spawned the human construction of races. The only time the word race ever appears in the Bible is to describe a competition among runners. And we have come up with this whole thing. So if we were to love God and neighbor enough to want to understand our neighbors, the world would become the beloved community that Dr. King envisioned.
Great. Oh my goodness, my mind is blown. Okay, that's all I can say about that one. So that's a tough act to follow, President Ludlam, but I'm gonna put it out there and see what you got. What are your solutions and recommendations?
You bet. These have been absolutely wonderful comments, and I hope to build on some of them. You know, I think as all of us, you know, as I look in my own life, right, I wear a lot of hats. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I participate in community, I'm a physician and chief medical officer, I'm an ecclesiastical leader, a lot of different hats. But for me, the solution ultimately starts with one individual, right? We can all make choices. Are we going to be part of the solution? Are we going to be part of the problem? And I love the references from Reverend Patterson about interfaith relations. And I've had several experiences, interestingly, in the last month that for me really were very rejuvenating and built bridges. And they were all initiated by different groups. In one case, our church did a what we call our Light the World Award, where we awarded a law enforcement individual who had committed much of their time and life to helping individuals with addictions. And in that, we had Jewish and Muslim and political and social services all come together to recognize this individual. And the feeling of camaraderie and bridge building was remarkable. Similarly, I was able to participate in a different event, this one actually sponsored by the Jewish community, where a lot of different religious organizations were brought in to share how light impacts or plays a role in their faith-based observances. And we had, again, Hindu and Muslim and Jewish and Christian groups all coming together and sharing and finding unifying, you know, and just being in the room with people who want to participate in bridge building creates an immediate affiliation and love for them and appreciation. You have a kinship and a relationship. And then finally, and this one was a little bit more sad, but again, created a lot of camaraderie, was we were able to participate in a vigil interfaith with a lot of different organizations supporting and showing solidarity with the Muslims when they had some really hateful acts perpetrated against them. And so in each of these, I think, what did this do for me as an individual? And, you know, just as I sort of already expressed, in each case, I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more bridge building. And I thought in one of them, and I think Congresswoman Sherrill will appreciate this one, I even noticed myself being a little bit more patient and kind on the road as I was driving home. And it just, the more we can do to bridge build and find love and just put ourselves in good places and in being very intentional about these acts, I think it creates a real step in the right direction. Just wanted to, as I knew this question would be coming, I pulled out a couple of quotes that I thought were very helpful. One was by the leader of my religion, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. His name is Russell M. Nelson. He's the president of the church. And in addressing the National Convention of the NAACP, he said the following: "We need to build bridges of cooperation rather than walls of segregation. We are all connected, and we have been given God-given responsibility to help make life better for those around us. We don't have to be alike or look alike to have love for each other. We don't even have to agree with each other to love each other. If we have any hope of reclaiming the goodwill and sense of humanity for which we yearn, it must begin with each of us, one person at a time." You know, and as I look at us as a pluralistic society, you know, it just is so evident. Not only don't we need to agree with everybody on everything, I don't think it's possible to agree with everybody on everything. And at the end of the day, that's okay. We can still solve problems. We can come together. We can see the positives in where people are coming from. And as I think, again, as Representative Sherrill mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have to agree, but you can at least be friends, and you can respect, and you can find common solutions where you look for that common ground and you build on it. And the things where there just feel like there's irreconcilable differences, you put those on the shelf, and you maybe can work on those later, but keep building off the good and don't get away from it. I think everybody on this call, on our panel here has referenced, stay away from the division and the pulling apart. So again, appreciate these great questions and look forward to our final answers.
So you definitely rose to the occasion. Thank you for that response. It was great. It was fantastic. And so I'm going to start with Congresswoman Sherrill, since we are at risk of losing you, to just close us out with the ray of sunshine that you do see, right? Because we always want to end upbeat and positive. And there is a lot of positivity out there as well. So what is it that you see and that you want to leave with today's audience?
Well, I feel incredibly positive. I mean, with groups like this is actually a lot of the conversation I have around with so many groups in the district. As I'm doing 9/11 ceremonies, it's been mentioned for the last 2 years, we've got to come together as a nation. We've got to be more unified. We have to have more compassion. The theme of this and the questions and just the thoughtfulness with which each of the panelists approach these questions shows, I think, what a deep dive we're all taking into this. And I think for every one of us, that reflects our communities, because it reflects conversations we've had either with constituents or parishioners or students, as we've been trying to weigh these heavy issues and kind of bring some solution to some of the darkness we've experienced over the last couple of years. And I do think the last couple of years have been dark. I'm a mother of 4 kids, and homeschooling really impacted my children in a negative way, in ways that I didn't even realize as we were going through it, because I think we were kind of hunkering down and just trying to get through it. So even once kids were back in school, it wasn't an immediate solution. It's taken time to get back into the rhythms. And you know, that we're all kind of recovering from that, but I do think we're in a much better place. We're kind of developing our sense of community again. And I think maybe not taking for granted how important it is, as we did before COVID, but understanding how short time is with our families, how important it is to take time to talk to our friends and to reach out to each other. And I'll also say, it does feel as if some of the anger and rage that people throughout the country have been feeling has subsided enough so that we can have some of these conversations. And I would even say, again, I'm talking not just about people across the country, I'm talking about myself. It was really hard after January 6th. It was really difficult to come to a point where I was going to have empathy and compassion again. And time does start to heal wounds. And I think we're at a place as a nation where we now realize there's no path forward, as we've heard from our panelists in this diverse nation, without each other. And we have to come together. And you don't have to like all your neighbors. You have to love all your neighbors. And by that, we mean you have to have empathy and kindness and try to understand where they're coming from so we can build this nation together. And this panel alone gives me such a great deal of hope to know that we are all walking the same path. We are all looking for these solutions, and we're all coming together from very different places around largely the same solutions. And that's going on across our nation right now. So I just want to thank all of you for being part of this and really caring so much about it, because I do. And so we always like to see others who are joining us in our struggles. And I really do think every single person has had such an insightful thing to add to this conversation. I just want to thank you again, Ferlanda, for bringing us together on this special day, the special weekend, as we think about these great struggles and how we're all united in this fight. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time to be with us. And I would like to, so your words were very heartwarming. And so I'm going to now, pass the baton on to Dean Dawkins and see how teary-eyed he can make us.
Oh boy. Well, let me just say again, thank you to you, Ms. Nixon. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to the Congresswoman. And that's going to be tough to follow up on. So I'm going to take a different angle again and try to save some face here. I want to start by encouraging two groups. First, I want to encourage our young people, right, that are out there. I know a lot of you are engaged in this work too. And I know that you may not be seeing a lot of affirming things, right, about what it means to engage in this work for a lifetime. But I want you to be encouraged. I want you to understand that, yes, it is a long and hard road, but it is one that is worthwhile. And you're seeing that in these fantastic panelists who have achieved amazing things in their personal lives and professional careers, right? There is reward that comes with the investment of time and energy. So don't give up. Don't get too tired. If you do, rest, but get back to the grind. All right. And I want to remind you of what we remind our children every day in our home, which is 3 rules. You got to work hard, you got to be nice, and you got to dream big. Okay. With regard to everyone else, right, who's been doing this work for a long time, I just want to send you love and encouragement. This work can be daunting. I think we can all acknowledge that, especially when we see the dissension and dysfunction at every turn and at seemingly every level of leadership in our nation. But as King shared during a 1960 speech at Spelman College, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. As we embark on a new year together, my wish for us all, seeking to get us just a little bit closer to the beloved community that King envisioned, is that we stay strong, that we continue to support each other, that we are encouraged, and that we keep moving the needle forward.
Thank you. That was very, very powerful. Thank you so much. And President Ludlam, what would you like to say to encourage our audience?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I think there's much to aspire to. I'm generally an optimistic person. I'm very solution oriented, and I think there are things that we can do. First, just to reiterate the challenge, right? I think that we are all concerned about the demonization of people that have opposing political and religious views. I think personally, being part of a religious institution in an increasingly secular society, I'm especially concerned about marginalization of those who hold religious beliefs that are unpopular or run counter to the majority view. There are solutions, though. There are things that, and I think we've had many very positive and uplifting solutions recommended today in this panel. Laws, laws and policies and societal norms should continue to allow for diversity of beliefs. And as we participate in that political process, I think that's an important thing, that we are working to preserve the rights of others, because ultimately that impacts our own personal rights. So, and again, speaking from a faith-based perspective, all people of different faiths, and all people of different groups, regardless of faith, should be afforded the same rights. Rights are universal. They cross all societies and religious and ethnic backgrounds. Human rights are just that. They're human rights, and that we really this may at times require us to allow others freedoms to express beliefs that we might disagree. And again, I think we've talked about earlier how beneficial that is to us when we are listening to other views, because sometimes we can become very at risk of getting very myopic. So I think as we do these things, we will create a lot of capacity as a society, as organizations, as individuals, to really begin to solve some of these divisive issues. I just wanted to end with just a couple of thoughts from my great exemplar, the perfect exemplar, and that's Christ, and how we can follow his example. And I think this was referenced earlier by one of the panelists, that he surrounded himself by those at the time that were considered not socially acceptable, right? He surrounded intentionally those of different faiths. He announced himself to a Samaritan woman, right? And this was like, the most controversial thing he could have done. The Samaritans and the Jews had hated each other for centuries, longstanding. He called a tax collector as one of his apostles. And he surrounded himself with anybody who would listen, whether they were followers and followed the commandments and did good things at all times, or they struggled. He surrounded himself with everything. So, he says in Matthew, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I think as we follow that admonition to love God and love our neighbor, we ultimately solve these problems. And how many problems in society would be resolved if we simply focused on this. And I think it's our capacity as religious and political and social leaders, that as we set an example ourselves and we work with those that we have the ability to lead, that we can foster and create these attitudes. And just again, in conclusion, and I know this has been said many times, really so appreciative of the very inspiring things that have been shared across this panel, and just a real gratitude to the Martin Luther King Observance Committee for putting this together. I think this is a great step as we continue. And I agree with what Congresswoman Sherrill said. There sort of seems to be an opening up after we've shut down, and let's run with this and keep this goodwill going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that great answer. And I'm going to leave it to Reverend Patterson to close us out with words of encouragement and inspiration.
Thank you. In every era, God has chosen men and women to bring about justice. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was influenced by Jesus, of course, and Mahatma Gandhi, an Indian lawyer, an anti-colonial nationalist, a political ethicist. Gandhi was born Hindu and publicly declared himself to be a Buddhist. Dr. King, under the influence of these two individuals and many others, taught us that the only thing to overcome hate is love. Love overcomes hatred, bitterness, and fear. And those engaged in the civil rights movement intentionally employed nonviolent resistance to lead this country just a little bit further along its journey toward becoming a more perfect union. We still have a long way to go. As was stated in Congresswoman Sherrill's opening remarks, America has a promise to fulfill. I joined Dr. King in quoting the prophet Amos, that we would continue the work of partnering with God to let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. It's my sincere prayer that the same spirit of liberty and love that guided the 20th century prophet that we call Martin Luther King Jr. will continue to lead and guide and direct and protect us on this journey toward our Pledge of Allegiance, liberty and justice for all. And I thank everyone for the opportunity to share with my esteemed colleagues as America continues to struggle to fulfill her promise. And since Congresswoman Sherrill started talking about economics, I want that check to be cashed.
Mhm. Congratulations to each and every one of you. Thank you so much. This has been an enlightening conversation. I certainly thank you for your time and your insights. I'm especially thankful for each of you modeling Dr. King's beloved community through civil discourse. It certainly made my job easy. Again, I thank you, and I wish each and every one of you a blessed day.
Thank you so
as
much.
well.
Thank you.
Thank you.